Come on, come on. We're here to continue discussing the White Album. I'm Charlie.
And I'm Cory.
And this week, in a continuation of our last episode, we're finishing up the Beatles-White Album. We did the first 17 songs on our last episode and discussed the backstory of the album. So if you want to hear all of that, check that out. Stop what you're doing now, listen to that first, and then come back to this episode where we're going to discuss the second part, which is 13 songs, but still almost as long because they're longer songs, naturally. But yes, still a lot of goodness from the Fab Four to discuss.
Yeah, man. Back on the second half of this album, and there is no shortage of tea, whether it be musically, whether it be relationship-wise, recording. They do not shy away from letting us have our cups overflowing with tea here.
Oh yeah, the Beatles, they keep us fascinated. That's why they're so fun to discuss, because there is always something going on there with the backstory, but just behind the song inspirations and just the band dynamics, especially at this point, because the relations are a bit frayed at this point in time for the band. As we discussed last time, they did go on a retreat to India with the Maharishi about transcendental meditation, along with some other A-listers. They wrote a lot of songs there, but there's also some songs from other times throughout 1968. They were always writing at this point in time, always doing stuff, always prolific. We love to see it.
Yeah, we do. We do. No spoilers, but this second half is not jarringly different in it, what's going on around it and the way it's put together. But I feel like before we dive into it, it definitely is a different, no pun intended, side of this album.
Oh, I completely agree. And I feel like quite a few of the sounds that were explored a bit in the first half are taken to a whole nother level in part two. There's just, they go all out with some of their genre shifts. And for the most part, I think they really pull all of these sounds off. This is such a versatile band. And I mean, they could be what they wanted to be. They weren't just one-trick ponies, which everyone knew that by this point. We're in an elevated realm for the Beatles in the post-Sgt. Pepper's world.
I was surprised to see how much crap they caught not having politically fueled music at this point. It's something that I learned since last time we talked about this album, but them in particular, it's wild that people were looking so much to, I'll just say music, but of course looking to the Beatles and looking for them to sing about these emotionally and politically charged times. And it's something that they never did, so I'm glad they didn't do, but I was very surprised at the amount of slack they were catching from all types of different media at this point for on that.
Yes, and it's something that we think of as more of a problem today, where artists are so frequently called out for not being, there are times you'll hear artists, why aren't you speaking out about this issue? You have such a huge platform. Or you just seem so out of touch with what's going on in the world. And sometimes those are really valid criticisms, but we see it all the time in this age of social media. This reception goes to show you that's always been a critique. It's been amplified due to social media, but yeah, it's always been around. So even without social media, you would hear criticism of artists for not using their platform to speak out on the issues plaguing our society. And times were turbulent in 1968, and they are definitely turbulent in 2024. We are recording this after a really weird weekend in the United States. in case you don't know, that's all I will say about that. But it just goes to show somehow this is still all relevant today, and that's a timeless band right there.
Yeah, man. That's the truth.
And with that being said, I'm ready to dive into these songs. I can't wait to discuss them.
Yeah, let's get at it.
All right, so side 3 of the album begins with Birthday, a song not written in India. This was written at Abbey Road Studios after the retreat, and it was influenced by a 1957 song called Happy, Happy Birthday by the Tune Weavers and it was written to celebrate the birthday of Linda Eastman, soon to be Linda McCartney. So this is a Paul McCartney recording, and they did this all in one day. The recording was only interrupted by the band catching the British TV premiere of a 1956 movie called The Girl Can't Help It, starring the late Jane Mansfield. And if you don't know who she is, you'll definitely know who her daughter is, none other than Mariska Hargitay, aka Olivia Benson. So it is relevant, even if you don't know. That more Beatles, they always knew what was going on somehow. That creative process is one Paul McCartney remembers really fondly. He said he just loved creating the song because it was all instantaneous. And he's got a point. This song's a lot of fun to listen to. It's just a joyous rock tune, and it's one of the best Beatles rockers. Like, I thought this was one of the most fun songs to play on Beatles Rock Band when I had that game. Yeah. This was one of the best ones to do. It's a staple of any birthday playlist. I actually was out a few nights ago and it was a guy's birthday, so I sang this at karaoke. I thought, why not? Perfect opportunity to do a Beatles tune, which is always fun at karaoke, and it worked. John Lennon called this garbage in 1980 because, of course, he did, but it's not garbage. It's just a fun rock song. So that was not a good hot take from John Lennon.
Yeah, it's a great way to open this second half, this side three, even in the vein of Back in the USSR, where we get this real rock forward heavy banger here. You can't help but feel the happiness. I really feel like, in my opinion, you can't help but feel the spontaneity inside of it as well. And if you're looking for energy to open it up, why not be inspired? You know, The Girl Can't Help It was the inspiration, but the musical star of that was Little Richard. So, you know, why not take energy from Little Richard and move with that? Here we go. Hot tea takes right off the jump. I'm with John. I'm not with John on saying it's shit. And I'm never really with John ever talking bad on his works, their works. This one always, even as a kid, never resonated with me as a Beatles song. It never resonated. It just felt too cookie cutter, and it was never one that I got down with. Everybody around me got down with it. Of course, like you said, it's that kind of song that you're going to go to constantly for birthday, for this, for that. But for me, this one, this is one of my least favorite Beatles songs. Hottest tea take, maybe so far. Maybe not for the day, but this one, not for me personally. As far as an opener for this, like I said, this is a great way to open it up. Super amount of energy, super amount of love inside the track. But for me, not this one. Not big on the old birthday, in personal opinion.
To each their own. I do not agree at all. And a lot of other people don't. Paul actually did this during his encore when I saw him a couple of years ago. So it's quite a crowd pleaser if he did that.
Yeah. Again, not getting too far ahead, but I'll let this be known. I have a bit of a personal opinion in the fact of, I really feel like this side 3 and 4 shows a little bit more of self-indulgence and breaking up of the Beatles. So while this first one is so beautifully done musically and energy, I just feel like this is, in that respect, this is closer to a Paul song to Linda than a Beatles song on the White Album. Oof. I didn't mean to come in here on a naysaying rant right off the bat, but this is how it is, folks, especially when you get years and years to think about these ones.
Well, I don't disagree with you about the indulgence in this second half, because we will see greater examples of it coming up, and especially when you dive into the backstories of these songs. In fact, the backstory of the next song we're going to talk about is pure self-indulgence, but I love it. The next track is Your Blues, and this was lyrically inspired by John Lennon deciding to end his marriage. He had met Yoko Ono and really fallen for her, but he was married to Cynthia Lennon and had a son with her. And he claimed that his dilemma actually made him feel suicidal, flat
Yeah.
out, which, wow, that's intense. But then again, this had to be a gut wrenching decision on his part to feel like you met your soulmate, yet you have a family. I mean, can't be an easy decision to get. And on paper, yes, it does look bad. You left your wife and child, but we are not thinking of the emotional aspect of that. So he put that into this song where he jokingly compared himself to Mr. Jones in Bob Dylan's Ballad of a Thin Man. You know, he had a sense of humor about it, which I really appreciate it. And he did it so well. This song has elements of satire, but it does work as a straight blues song as well. And that was a really trendy sound at this point in time. And this song to me is proof that the Beatles and the Stones have been compared over and over again. It's pretty hard to do blues rock like the Stones do, but when they wanted to, the Beatles could. And this song is proof of that. Definitely one of the top Lennon compositions of this album. Possibly my favorite Lennon composition, actually. I really enjoy this song a lot.
Yeah, it's a really great Lennon tune. Number two on this, it fits so perfectly here. Sound style is a bit jarring first listen because you're not expecting it, and there is this little bit of parody here, to the blues, but it's written in India where he's feeling suicidal, like you said, and lonely, and what better time to let the blues write themselves. Even I've read so many times that this was almost purely satire, and that it was a real showing of the Beatles doing a parody of a song, or I'm sorry, of a genre that they really aren't not so familiar with, but like in the roots of. So it's wild to see them actually flourish here inside of satire and have a great blues song on their hand. It happens like that. Let the blues write themselves. Lennon was good at that. Lennon was good at looking inside, whether it was negative or positive, and letting it write itself. This is definitely a classic, definitely up there for me on this album, if not in their discography, but hands down a really solid number two right here.
I absolutely adore this song. And it was what I kind of rediscovered a bit in doing this. I hadn't listened to this album front to back in quite a while, actually. I don't even remember when I last did. And some of the songs are so familiar. It's like, okay, I can skip it. I already know I already know how I feel about Birthday, but this one was a bit of a pleasant rediscovery for me. And now it's for sure back in my mind as a Beatles favorite. So really, that's one reason I love doing this show, is getting to not even just discover albums for the first time, but somewhat rediscover them to an extent, because it had been a while for me.
Yeah, talking about discovering, this one was pointed out to me, but it really led to a hardcore breakdown of the editing on this. And there is some real, oh man, I want to say this in a very nice way. There is some real scotch tape editing in some places on this album. There's a example here that was pointed out to me, but I had never heard before at 317, where this was all done in a one take shot in a separate room and then had to be produced outside of it. And that 317, it cuts like nobody's business. Now, mind you, it's not glaring, but once you hear it, you cannot unhear this scotch tape cut here. So yeah, finding all types of new stuff, discovering, that's one of them for me.
Oh, most definitely. And another thing is, when it comes to these edits and mixes, I definitely, some of the Beatles albums have been reissued in recent years for their anniversaries, including this one in a new mix from George Martin's son Giles. And they're overall fantastic mixes. And I really think the job he did on the White Album is beautiful. And it's not the standard one that shows up on streaming. You have to go into the White Album Super Deluxe Edition, but you should listen to it because it's better than the 2009 one by a
Yeah,
mile.
definitely.
in my
by a mile.
opinion. Yeah.
By a mile. If I was on the street, I'm with you. I'm telling you to listen to that one. If you're looking for a nostalgic sense, okay, go ahead and listen to this. But as far as us breaking it down, we'd be doing no justice if we didn't do this one. But I'm 100% with you on that.
Gotta do it. And before we move on, if you want to continue hearing us break it down, please subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening to us and leave us a nice rating and review. Forgot to mention that in our intro, so I wanted to mention it now.
Yeah,
And
man.
follow us on social media where links are in the description. And now we're going to slow it down a little bit with another song I actually heard somebody do at karaoke recently. I was really happy to hear this. I complimented them on the good song choice. Mother Nature's Son. John and Paul both wrote songs after hearing Maharishi lecture about the unity of man and nature. And Paul, for his part, was really inspired by Nat King Cole's Nature Boy, which is a beautiful song. And he wrote this song while visiting his dad in Liverpool. So really reflecting on his childhood to write this song. And John wrote a song called A Child of Nature, which didn't make this album, but it was reworked into a song that was featured on the Imagine album by him called Jealous Guy, one of the most well-known songs on that album. That's a song to talk about another day, though, because we're going to talk about this song and that Paul wrote, and it's another really pretty McCartney composition. It's not the most exciting of his compositions. It's an acoustic, it's an acoustic number, but you just hear his gift for melody even on this simple acoustic song. Would I put this at the level of Blackbird? No, but it's a really nice song that I do recommend. You look like you disagree with me.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Oh,
I'm
good.
sorry. I'm a little tidbit behind the scenes how the sausage is made. I'm drinking a carbonated drink, which I usually don't do. So that's just all the bubbles that you're seeing there. I will say this is a beautiful song. I will look directly at the guy who was griping about the self-indulgence and tell him to cover his ears, because this is a beautiful track, but it's one of the ones where I like to give a look the other way because it's so beautiful. But this is, in a recording sense and a Beatles sense, this is another self-indulgent one. In fact, this one was one that he worked solely by himself, the timpanis, the whole nine, the setup. And then when everybody came in, or I think it was Lennon and Ringo, when they came in, it was pure tension. So it sucks that so much tension comes off something as beautiful as this. It's just composed so simple and beautiful. This is one that I find myself singing all the time, or at least whistling. This is a great McCartney track, a great Beatles track. But this is on that self-indulgent note for me too.
Yeah, actually, I kind of wish that McCartney did this during the acoustic section of the show I went to.
Oh, yeah.
I would have preferred this over another track he did Here Today, which was a nice song, but it's got nothing on this one. Got nothing on this one. But
yeah,
all that tension pours into that. It pours into the next song, which is Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey. It was initially titled Come On, Come On, but no, of course it was changed, even though that title makes sense. And this is about John Lennon's affair with Yoko Ono. He was just tuning everybody out despite the disapproval. Everybody was saying, what are you doing, man? Like, they didn't say that, of course, exactly, but that was the consensus, and she was always around. Even if she didn't say much, her presence was a big change for the band, which did not allow wives and girlfriends into the sessions before this time period. But oh no, Yoko had to be there. And regardless, she was damned if she didn't just by being there, unfortunately. But Lennon just didn't care because he was enthralled. And McCartney actually thought that the song was about drugs, which makes perfect sense because the monkey is a metaphor used for drugs in songs. We discussed it a while back on our George Michael episode and the song Monkey about drug addiction. It's a banger, but this song is a banger too. This is a really fun rocker. And it reminded me of what you said during the last episode about how upset John Lennon was about not being included on Why Don't We Do It in the Road, because he loves rocking out. He loves doing that. And this is proof that he does that and does it really well. This is a great rocker on that level that's more lyrically substantial than Why Don't We Do It in the Road. But this is another one of the most fun songs on the album. And another band we covered recently, Soundgarden, actually covered this song in 1989. And if you want to hear more about Soundgarden, please listen to our episode about Super Unknown, because I thought it was quite a good episode, and it hasn't gotten as many listeners as some of our others. So please do that for us. It would be much appreciated. I'll even include a link down below so you can listen to it. Anyway, what do you think about this song?
I love this song. This is going back to what you were referencing earlier. You know, this is that Lennon. This is why he was sad he wasn't on Why Don't We Do It in the Road. This is that Lennon I like to hear, especially with the boys, where they're really resonating on this. I'll go as far as to say British rock, but this really naked rock with incorporating elements, musical elements that we might not necessarily expect. This one goes all the way. This is my Maharishi two-piece right here, the start of my Maharishi two-piece. This was coming off of a jam written in India, and it's actually a trifecta here because this is another glaring now that I've heard it. And this one wasn't pointed out to me, but at 9 seconds, 8 seconds, 9 seconds into this, you can hear the cut. Now, I understand you're coming off of a big jam and you're trying to cut this down, but it is such a naked edit. Enough of the edits. This one rocks out all the way. It does its job here in the number 4 spot too. It's another example of every once in a while a fade out on a rock and roll song works for me, and this one works well with its fade out here, and it doesn't stop. So I like to say the Maharishi two-piece because this one I felt a lot of joy, and it was written inside of this India place as far as this second half of the album. And the next one for me is the opposite end of the Maharishi two-piece.
Oh, yes, it is, because before Drake and Kendrick were beefing, Lennon and the Maharishi were beefing, and Lennon had something to say about it in one of the earliest examples of a diss track, Sexy Sadie. It's not actually going to say Maharishi. The band didn't want to get sued, but yeah, their relationship with him soured quite a bit. The Beatles were told that Maharishi just wanted their money, and it was reported that Maharishi made an unwanted sexual advance toward Mia Farrow, the actress who was also on the retreat. Yeah, Lennon wrote this to just express his disillusionment. But despite the fact that it's a cutting diss track, it's a really pretty melody and my favorite Lennon vocal on the album by a landslide. He sounds beautiful on the song. Just his little high notes of "you don't know who you think you are." Just, I can't do it, but Lennon could, and it's really beautifully done. This is a Beatles fan favorite for a reason. But in an interesting post note, later on, Lennon didn't in his lifetime get to mend fences with the Maharishi, and Ringo, I don't think even cared to. I don't think he was even worried about it, but George and Paul both did. George even went so far as to say that that the Maharishi never made advances towards Mia Farrow. She had said otherwise in her memoir. I do believe you. Sorry, George. Love you. R.I.P. But I do believe that happened.
Yeah, this being a Beatles favorite, I'm so happy it's for the right reasons and not the tea. Even though we're here spilling the tea on it, this is a beautiful song. I'm with you. The Lennon vocals on this are close your eyes, sit back, and enjoy It's such a beautiful, beautiful song for him. It's what I love about them with there's no way in God's green earth that you would have any idea this was about a beef with the leaving or them leaving the Maharishi, but 100% was written inside of that. Such a weird and beautiful tongue-in-cheek moment from them. It's what I love. They've done it over and over again, and everyone sounds just as beautiful as the one before. For me, this whole thing, and I won't go too far off, but this is really unfortunate finding and really learning about their exit on the Maharishi. More so because I feel like this is a time where they are searching for each other, searching for meaning. And not only the Maharishi, but many different people are getting time on their shoulders, getting time in their ears, regardless of who was in the wrong, if it happened, if it didn't happen. A lot of this was coming from Magic Alex, who, now that I'm starting to talk about this, realize many people listening might not know who Magic Alex is. But long story short, he was, in my opinion, a charlatan of processing, a charlatan of production, basically a hanger on that Lennon 120% listened to everything he said. And a lot of this came from Magic Alex. I'm sorry. I have a chip on my shoulder for Magic Alex. So it's just too many people around wanting to suck off the teat of the Beatles. And unfortunately, we lost them, finishing what I think could have been a positive ending of a retreat with the Maharishi. The silver lining is we got this beautiful song and the second half of the Maharishi two-piece that was sweeping the nation.
Yes, yes. And well, a part of the nation that swept it came in California. Because one guy who did not believe any of this was about the Maharishi was Charles Manson. He named one of his family members Sexy Sadie after this song because, yeah, he bought this album and he had some wild ideas about it, to put it lightly, which we'll be discussing a bit when it comes to the next song, which is Helter Skelter. Now, before we talk about Charles Manson, let's talk about the backstory and what we think about it, of course. McCartney actually wrote this song in response to the reception of The Who's I Can See for Miles. He saw it reviewed as this really heavy song, and McCartney didn't see. They thought, what? No, I could do that better. So he wrote this super raucous song, Helter Skelter, to which he admitted the lyrics were nonsense poetry. That was absolutely it. But it was really about the sound and creating this just heavy rock tune. And he did it really well. I love hearing how the Beatles were influenced by their peers to outdo themselves. Like they saw what the Beach Boys did and wanted to do better. They saw what the Who did and wanted to one-up it. And that's how you push and challenge yourself. McCartney did not stay in his comfort zone for this song. This is the heaviest rock tune that the Beatles ever did. And it still rocks very hard. This is thought of as a precursor to heavy metal for a reason. Yeah, a deserved rock classic. That's really all I could say about it. It's Helter Skelter. It's just an awesome song. And I will say that it was one of the live highlights for me all this time later. Our friend Matt told me you have to record him doing Helter Skelter if he does it. So I was like, oh, I will. And I sent it to him. But yeah, I watched it back again and it was just awesome. I mean, it's Helter Skelter, man. Come on.
Yeah, it's a rocker. It is the epitome of them doing anything rock and roll. It is nonstop. Just, oh God, it's so raw. I'll tell you what, it's so raw that when I was young, I didn't understand why it was so angry. That's how rock that this song was. This was a skipper for me when I was a kid because it was too much. It was way too much for me. Looking at it now and even in my teenage years, it's such a great song. There's so much raw energy here. You can't help feeling it, listening to it, playing it live. is amazing. Just playing it with your friends is amazing. This is one of those songs where you can really let it all hang out. And I love that it's here on this album. As much as Paul wants to say nonsensical, I think it's just a beautiful little crazy, I guess you could say nonsensical, but poetic take on literally the Helter Skelter, the what we know as the, well, I don't even know what we call it in America, but the twisty slide at a playground. That's what the Helter Skelter was in British slang, or in English speak. But as far as it being anything else, I'm gonna really try to stay cool for this next part, man. When we start talking about the whole Charles Manson thing on it, it's a beautiful song, and hope that might not be all I have to say, but that's all I have to say for now.
Yes, this unfortunately is just unavoidable when talking about this song. It's just way too connected. So a guy named Charles Manson in the late 60s, he had a really long rap sheet, career criminal. He had a commune of people at one point that he called his family. And Charles Manson, in his head, believed or told people that he believed he was Jesus Christ. And he bought this album and felt that the Beatles were communicating specifically to him, that they were four angels communicating to Jesus or Manson. And he sensed that, he claimed that there was going to be an uprising between the races coming up, and he called this uprising Helter Skelter after this song. That's a much simplified version of the story. There is a lot more to it. But if we do talk about, we'll be here forever because there's just a lot to get into. And unfortunately, it is so connected to this song that the definitive book about the Manson murders is called Helter Skelter. It was by the prosecutor of the cases because, yes, the Manson family committed several murders, and they were horrifying crimes. We're not going to discuss the details of them. If you want to read that, go for it. Look it up elsewhere. Read the Helter Skelter book. It's really well done. But it is sad that Manson's crimes got so much attention that it had to get connected with the Beatles. I mean, I'm glad that McCartney is still okay with doing the song live after all of that. You could see why he wouldn't be, but it's obviously the talk of a crazy person, and Charles Manson is now dead. He died in prison, as he should, but yeah, it was a total tragedy, and it was wrapped up in a lot of hysteria and nonsense talk. That's yeah.
I mean, it's the other side to John feeling how he did. We talked about this on our first episode about the White Album. Is, like, stop looking into our stuff for stuff you need. If that's what you get out of it, fine, but don't think we're writing it for anything other than ourselves. I'm totally paraphrasing, but in the light of, like, this wasn't written for that. I mean, look how man, I go on forever on this. Look how wrong Manson was, not only on the interpretation of Helter Skelter, but then to go as far as name a family member Sexy Sadie. Sexy Sadie for Lennon was the Maharishi. So now you're naming one of your people Maharishi? No, you have no idea. A crazy person is bottom line. It's so wild because it's what I love about art is that everybody can take what they want. It's just wild to see people contort that for negative doings.
Yes,
and rant.
Yes, and Lennon absolutely had a point, but I don't think he or anybody could have imagined that the White Album or any songs on it would be a part of a murder trial. Yeah. Like, there's just no way anybody could have predicted that. I did a whole independent reading project on Helter Skelter. I did look quite a bit into the Manson murders. It is morbidly fascinating, but yeah, the Beatles are a big part of the story, unfortunately. But
Mm. Well, you know, I could go on for a minute.
yeah.
Ain't no way it was like that because they put this next song out right after it,
Oh
on the
yeah.
same album,
Yeah. This is one of the songs that was not highlighted by Charles Manson. I mean, I can't see how it would have been because, yeah, even, yeah, you can't make the connection to any of that with this one because George Harrison wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Bob Dylan when he wrote Long, 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 which was inspired by the Dylan tune Sad Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. And Harrison, it's structured as a love song. It sounds like it, but Harrison admitted that the song was actually, he was singing to God. So it's one of those songs that can be both, which that's a good songwriter right there. Unfortunately, this is my hot tea take of the episode. I think this song is really fucking boring. I don't, oh, I
I don't.
can't do it. I can't
It's
do
not
it.
a hot tea tick.
It's not. I've seen this ranked high on like lists. There's people who love this song.
Now, well, between me and you, I will say, because I'm the same way. People say this is Harrison's finest. Like, what? Get out of here.
No, it's his weakest on this album by a landslide. Every other
This is
song that he did here was beautiful. This one was just not it. I will say I'm glad that Harrison and Dylan got to collaborate 20 years later in the Traveling Wilburys. That's the positive spin I'm going to make out of this song because that's that was a good thing. This is just a lame song, and it's the end of this side of the album, and this makes you want to turn it over. So you will hope that what's coming next is much better, and not wanting to put you to sleep. Frankly,
Yeah, I'll start there because that was in my notes on this. Like, whew, man, we had such a great flip over at the end of both sides of the first half of this double album set, and then this is the way we end the first side of the second album. Like, come on, where are you at? I'm not taking anything away. There's beautiful pieces here if you're loving a Harrison avant-garde moment. I'm not trying to take away from it, but for me, no way. Especially not pacing, especially not at the end of here. This is another big self-indulgent piece here on this second record, this second half of this album, and I forget about it. That's how crazy it is. I forget about it all the time, all the time. Um, it's tough, man. It is tough. You know, it's tough when Charlie has to reach all the way to the Traveling Wilburys to get a silver lining for how he feels about this song.
yeah.
It is a tough one. Sorry, George, but not for me on that one.
Well, I'm also always happy to talk about anything involving Tom Petty. So
I
that's
feel you.
that's where
I
I'm
feel
at
you.
with that. But fortunately, we are going to flip it over to the next track, Revolution One. This was originally all but one big song from John Lennon, split up into two parts. They're both included here. So this was Lennon's response to social turmoil of sorts. He was just against this revolutionary violence, and well, there was violence in the news. There were riots in 1968. That was the year that Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy Sr., not Jr., were both shot. So it was a turbulent year in the world in 1968. And he just used this tune to express that, like, we don't need a revolution, even if you say you want it, because we don't need to be violent and anarchic. He just didn't feel that that was the answer. Now, this is a bit of a weird thing. So, the Beatles had quite a few singles that were not included on their albums in a strange turn of events. That was just how it was done with them, and not uncommon for the 60s, I suppose. And he recorded this version first. It's a slow blues rock kind of number with elements of doo-wop in the backing vocals. And in one lyric, he says, "You can count me out." it in, because he's leaving it ambiguous. When he recorded this for the single, which this song was not an A side, the single version, which is more of a straight ahead rocker, was the B side to Hey Jude, but it became a hit in its own right. And yeah, people really, either way, looked through a glass onion for this song big time because he was criticized for not standing with the movement of sorts. And this is an example of, you make a social commentary, but it's going to be held to that higher standard. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. At the end of the day, I will say the single version I think is superior. That's a classic Beatles song, but this is still a beautifully done song, regardless of the context. And I like it in this form as well. I like the bluesiness of it. I like the backing vocals. It's just a great song that doubles as both pop music and commentary.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I love Revolution. I love it as a song. I think there's so many parts of it that are just really musically done well. It's a great composition. It's a full composition. That being said, I want everybody to remember that as I go on about Revolution 1. To choose the slower version of this song acoustic for the opening of the second side of this album after Long, 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 I'm reaching and saying that's why I would do it. I will say my hottest tea take, or I think my hottest tea take, and there's levels to this tea take here, is if you're going to put Revolution here, then you take this one, you put it as a B-side to Hey Jude, because it's a neat little piece of it, and you put Revolution here. But I'm going to take it one more and say if that's the case, because the Revolution we're talking about is an up-tempo, and you pop it up at the start of this album and you put Back in the USSR here, because, and not really for spoiler alert, you need something for this second half of this album. You need some substantial music for the second half of for this side of this album. You need something substantial. So the hot tea take for me is Revolution 1, you're on the B side. Revolution B side, you're either here, or I think it would have been a better choice to have this as the opener for the album and Back in the USSR here.
I'm not against it. I mean, there's definitely a definitive version of Revolution, and that's the one. That's it. The B-side single version of Hey Jude is it. It's just dumb that neither of those songs are on an album to begin with.
Heard.
Frankly, like this is a curio. It's cool. The definitive version was there. And either of those songs can be on this album because it's the White Album. They do everything here. So why not?
Yeah. This is such a discovery for me, and it might sound silly listening to me talk about this, especially the amount of music we listen to, but it took me back to think when I really made the choice of that. I don't remember when it was that I realized that this Revolution was like the acoustic slower version. In my brain, as a young listener, it was the B-side Revolution that was here the whole time. It's so crazy how we discover these new nuances to listening to this album this late in the game.
Yeah, and well, spoiler alert a bit, but this whole Revolution confusion thing has actually a bit unfairly had me rate this album a bit lower than I perhaps should have, because it's just too much and it's unnecessary when you have the definitive version. I feel like you got to keep it simple sometimes, but that was perhaps unfair because the good obviously outweighs the bad of this album for sure. There's so many great songs here. There were just a couple of head-scratching choices made. And maybe one of them was the next one, depending on what kind of listener you are. I wouldn't put it in like the top. It's probably bottom 10 of the album, but it's fine. We're on to Honey Pie, not Wild Honey Pie. This was a tribute to Jim McCartney, Paul's dad, and the kind of songs that he liked. So this old music hall sound, which McCartney also went for on Martha, My Dear. Fortunately, I like this song a lot better than Martha, My Dear. That was a song on which we diverged. Um, but I prefer this one to that one easily. It's still like corny, especially after all the heavy rock songs that we've heard. But it's fine. It doesn't need to be there, but it doesn't offend me either. So
I'll start this off with like, as far as critically listening, us doing what we do here on Turntables and Tea, on a production level, they've tossed the pacing of this album into the shit, into the air, and said, let's just go. And at least knowing what was happening behind the scenes, you know, you can see where it's like, oh man, towards the end of this album, it sort of just went all over the place. This is a perfect example. Do I love this song? Oh, you better believe I love this song. But that's me as a listener, as far as what I like to get from the Beatles. This is up there with Wild Honey Pie. You know, this is, Martha, My Dear, this is perfectly in that vein. I don't get the Sergeant Pepper's horn blasts, but maybe I'm just aging myself. But I've always loved the old flapper 1920s. I won't say this is so much ragtime as this has some ragtime elements, but I love that anyway. So yeah, this one I'll eat up with a spoon all the time. But as far as a critical listen, man, it's wild to see how off the rails this, more specifically, this half of this album has been. Side 4.
yeah.
Just off the rails. And here's another one. And again, I've beat this nail into the coffin, but this is more self-indulgence, man.
Oh yeah.
Christ, you got a clarinet saxophone part that wasn't even there. You know, that guy recorded outside and produced onto this. Like, it's tough, man. It's tough.
The bonkersness of this, I found out during my research about a totally bonkers cover of this song that exists.
Oh yeah?
Yes, so the actor Dom DeLuise, who I know from Blazing Saddles, covered this song in a 1978 musical film called Sextet. This movie is considered to be one of the worst films of all time. And it was the final film done by Hollywood Golden Age icon Mae West. So it's a bit notable because of that. And I have not listened to it. I haven't seen the movie, but it sounds like it contains some truly bizarre musical numbers. There's also apparently a disco version of the Captain and Tennille's Love Will Keep Us Together. You know, I am happy to know that something as bonkers as this exists. And, you know, not every movie can be Blazing Saddles, I guess. Sometimes you gotta sing the Beatles in a movie musical, too.
Dom DeLuise doing Honey Pie? I gotta search that out.
I just always think of him as that angry director in Blazing Saddles, directing if you're not doing it. What a guy. What a guy. We're now going to get a bit rockier now. And this is the story of this song is so self-indulgent and so first world.
Almost, oh man, there's so many levels to self-indulgence that just came to me on this one. But go on, my man.
This one. This is Savoy Truffle, and George Harrison wrote this song about his friend Eric Clapton's love of chocolate. They had a back and forth going. Clapton played on While My Guitar Gently Weeps, and George played on Cream's Badge. So they were friends at this point in time. Well, until George's wife left him for Eric Clapton. But you know what? 1968, all was good between them. And yeah, this is a pretty silly thing to write a song about. I mean, okay, who doesn't love chocolate? Unless you're allergic, that you're not going to meet them, I don't think. Good luck meeting them. But you know what? This is a really fun rocker. It just is, and it's more proof of just what Harrison could do with lyrics and melody. Like, it's this silly concept, but he makes this really fun tune out of it. And it actually, this is quite a cool thing I found. This song was a year later covered by the jazz legend Ella Fitzgerald, and her version's quite good. It worked really well in a jazz rock kind of sense because, again, it's that melody that you're able
Yeah.
to adapt it to again, like the jazz voice of that that was living in 1969 could take this song and do her thing with it. So I really enjoy this song despite the self-indulgence. Just it's sublimely crafted. Really, that's all you can say about it.
Yeah, it's such a I'm using beautiful a lot. It's such an awesome composition here musically for me because it bridges a lot of musical gaps, or more so melds some genres that I don't necessarily put together. And for me, you get this go-go sound that really sings true at the bridges, and then you get these wild horn sounds and this late 60s, early 70s rock and roll, and it just never stops. This song, I don't care what it's about. This is the layers of self-indulgence. I'm going to be self-indulgent here. I don't care what it's about. This song always gets down. But I mean, how can you get more self-indulgent than a box of chocolates, especially a box of assorted chocolates? So that's for you. It is definitely one of the cooler tracks on this side. I will say, with all of its awesomeness musically, it still doesn't put a stamp on this side for me as far as a Beatles track, as far as I'm not even going to say hit, but as far as just something that is specifically Beatles. As much as I love it, you could pop it on and maybe there's a good chance a few people wouldn't know that it is. That's the only shortcoming I have of Savoy Truffle. Other than that, I love that song.
Oh yeah, total banger. And yeah, again, I'm glad you mentioned the go-go because what a beautiful incorporation of that sound here.
Yeah.
Just on this track. And I love even the self-quotation of oobla dee oobla da too. Also a bit self-indulgent, but this song, you're right. This song gets down. It gets
Yeah.
down every time. But it's gonna slow down a little bit with the next track. We're creeping to the end here with Cry Baby Cry. This song was inspired by both a commercial and the nursery rhyme Sing a Song of Sixpence. And John Lennon composed this in late 1967. So this predates India. But he liked it enough to continue it on here. And it's a nice Lennon ballad. I'll say that. It's a very nicely done song. Good vocals from him. It has a coda that has become known as Can You Take Me Back? It's just a small piece from Paul McCartney. So it's a two disparate songs in one kind of that are combined into this, I guess, to make it Lennon McCartney. I think they ended up doing that much more effectively on Let It Be with I've Got a Feeling, which was two songs combined into the one, which listen to that episode if you haven't too, our Let It Be episode. So yeah, it's not one of the best songs here, but it's perfectly pleasant to listen to. That's really all I have to say about it.
Yeah, I have a nostalgic run with this one, so it gets points, a little extra points from me. I've always loved just the way this song was written musically, that slow walk down to the banging refrain. I it's one of my favorites. It's one of my favorites. I will say this one without the nostalgia for me is a little bit more than just a Lennon jam here. I feel like this is the only maybe and again I'm taking a little bit away because the chip on my shoulder for Revolution 1, but this one for me is the most Beatles on this side of on side 4 for me, and that's Cry Baby Cry.
Yeah, it is a nice song to have at this point in the album. I will say that, especially considering what we get next. The peak of self-indulgence. Revolution 9. The most polarizing Beatles song and their longest song ever. This song is 8 minutes and 22 seconds, and this was originally just the second part of Revolution. The whole idea was just a 10-minute long song, but they decided to make this its own track and elongate it. And this isn't really a song, it's a sound collage that's entirely Lennon and Ono. They did a couple of experimental albums before the White Album was released, but they just had to put their stuff into the Beatles game, and this was the song no one else was included on. But obviously nobody else wanted to do it. It's got a lot of speeches, some loops of past Beatles songs like A Day in the Life and Tomorrow Never Knows, which that just makes me sad because it reminds me of what the band did when they were collaborating together and not just writing songs separately. They produced songs like A Day in the Life, and yeah, now it's Revolution 9. And yeah, I hate it. I don't think that's a hot tea take. A lot of people hate this song. I skip it almost every time. The main reason I haven't purchased this album on vinyl is because I don't like skipping songs on vinyl, but this is actually that unpleasant to listen to. Yeah, I hate it.
Very rarely do we boil it down to a straight I hate it. And I don't think ever in the history of this podcast have we both said I hate it at the same exact time. This, I don't care which way I've looked at it, and I've looked at it a million different ways. I understand avant-garde. I understand experimental. I tip my hat to it. This is not my favorite of either of those, and by far not my favorite Beatles anything ever. This, and now maybe I'm reaching a tad, but as pissed off as John was about why don't we do it in the road, for me, this is his get back at Paul on this album, because Paul was out of the country and they were like, all right, let's do this. And the thing was, it wasn't even like Paul was totally against this kind of experimentation and this avant-garde tape melding sound, because, and I just found this out deep diving on this record, but he had done something akin to that in like a late night London rave scene. I'm terrible. I should know this. I think it's called like Magic Circus or something like that. But long story short, they knew that they had done this before, and this was on the table for him to do it. Especially with Yoko, there's so much bad blood around this. It's whack. It's not needed. I hate hating on art, and I know you do too. But to say like I hate it, I'm with you. Please buy it. I'm gonna have to buy this album for you now, because you're not gonna buy it because you don't want to skip this, but you need to own this on vinyl. But yeah, that's how tough this is. I say polarizing, schmolarizing. Anybody who's behind Revolution 9, other than like a sense of like avant-garde art, get out of here with that nonsense, man. Like this, yeah, it's not for me. I'm sorry. I could rant and rave a bunch with this one, but not only is it not for me, it doesn't have a place on this album. Now, don't get me wrong, you couldn't do what comes after this right after Cry Baby Cry, but put well, I'm getting a little overworked here. Put something here with some substance, something substantial. Put Hey Jude here. Christ
That's
almighty.
what I've been thinking the whole time.
Put it, I can't believe I never even thought that. Put Hey Jude here. You self-indulgent gets.
It would have sold even more albums if Hey Jude was here too.
Oh, I didn't think about the finale piece. And oh man, are you kidding me? And then throw Good Night in on after. Missed opportunity, Beatles. I can't believe it took me 42 years to realize that, but son of a gun, what were you thinking?
I've been thinking it the whole time we've been researching this album. I'm like, Hey Jude was right there. If you wanted a long song, just do it. Like,
Christ almighty, was a single for this album.
And I know not everybody likes Hey Jude, but Hey Jude's a classic for a reason. So don't come at me. I will always defend Hey Jude.
If you
Always.
if you if you don't like Hey Jude, you like Revolution Number 9.
Yeah, go listen to Two Virgins by John and Yoko. Don't listen to the Beatles. Go listen to that. We're done
Yeah,
with this. And you know
yeah.
what? It even just Yoko doing it, I'm not going to blame her for it. She has contributed to good John Lennon songs. They did
Heard.
Happy Xmas War is Over. She's even on backing vocals for Bungalow Bill in the first half. I love Bungalow Bill. This just sucks.
Yeah. I don't blindly hate Yoko Ono. I have found some Beatles fans that blindly hate her. I don't blindly hate her. I don't hate her.
No.
Um
And it's a
so yeah, like
nuanced. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
this one just isn't it doesn't belong, man. It doesn't belong.
Yeah. It's a nuanced situation. With the breakup of the Beatles. You can't just blame it on one person.
Heard that.
So, yeah, no, we're not blind haters. She has made good music before. She's made good music with John. This just is not an example of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I usually just skip it. And yeah, this is actually, you mentioned that this is, I have all the Beatles albums from Revolver to Let It Be on vinyl. This is the one that's messy.
Man.
I know that needs to
That hurt.
change,
That hurts my heart.
obviously.
Yeah, that
I
hurts my
know.
heart. Just know what you're getting for your birthday or Christmas, whatever.
I'll take it.
Regardless.
I'll take it.
Heard
I
that.
will take it. But now we are at the end of the White Album with Good Night. The song was written by John Lennon for his son Julian, which again makes it a perfect compliment to Hey Jude, which was also written for Julian Lennon.
Oh, I heard. There you go. Golly gosh.
Um, and one book that I have, I got it like years ago for like Easter or something. I think it's called The Beatles, A Hard Day's Right. It's the story behind every Beatles song. It was a great resource for researching this album for me. And the author of that book, Steve Turner, very correctly pointed out that if Paul McCartney had written this song, Lennon would have called it crap.
Yeah, what up?
All Lennon said about the song was that it was over lush in terms of its orchestration. Because, yeah, there's only one Beatle featured on this song, and it's Ringo Starr doing the singing. Because they'd like to sometimes have Ringo sing a song that they wrote. He sang Yellow Submarine and With a Little Help from My Friends as well. So he was going to have his vocal moment that he didn't write. And yeah, technically, no, this isn't really much of a Beatles song because of the lack of Beatles on it. But in its own right, I think it's a pretty song. It's very, I mean, it's beautifully orchestrated. You could say overdone. I think it's pretty well done, and it's a nice lullaby. Do I think it's a classic, great Beatles song? No, but I appreciate it for what it is, and I do think it's a really good album closer. I mean, the title alone, "Good Night," this is perfect for it, and it's just frankly, it's refreshing to hear this after Revolution 9 if you don't skip that song. It's just kind of a nice balm after that. Like, oh, nice. Okay. I just thought of this. This is an example. George Martin could do an orchestrated production very well, better than Phil Spector could. But that's a later on. Go listen to the Let It Be episode, but go on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild that Martin put this in afterwards, where it was just acoustic guitar and Ringo singing. This is like I can only equate it to like Disney level orchestration with choir, like reminiscent of like old Snow White or Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, if you must, for this lullaby. But it hits. It's not overproduced. It's actually, for me, just my opinion, it's a perfect closer for this album because it's off the beaten track and it has this different sound, and we celebrate that throughout this album, whether self-indulgent or not. We are all over the board. They are all over the board here, but it's in a controlled sense, even with this half of, or this side, for being off the rails. It's a really welcoming end point to this whole entire two album.
Yeah.
Two record album.
Two record album, a true double album. We are at the end of this wild ride now. It was a really fun ride. I'm really glad that we got to do this. Really glad we got to.
Yeah,
Regardless of
man.
how I
Yeah,
feel
man.
about Revolution now.
That's all right. It's all right. Revolution 9. Whew, that's a tough one.
Yeah, yes, it is. But regardless of what we think of that, some of the pacing, I think I know what I think we have the same grade for this album. What's yours?
I worried because you said you were grading it low, and I was like, "Ooh, how low is he gonna go for Revolution 1 and Wildness?" I there If you're a first time listener, maybe you don't know this, but if you listen before, when we go into these nostalgic albums, it's always tough for me to really turn just a critical ear. And this album is the epitome of any album as far as nostalgia and just my being scattered all over this album. From a critical standpoint, from front to back, this is filled with nonstop new and old ideas from the Beatles, with very, very few occurrences, more so in the latter half, that do any bit of taking me away from being enthralled by this double album all the way through. There's no way I couldn't give this anything less, but I'm going to give this album an A.
Yeah, it's an A for me too. The revisit has prompted me to see the light a bit. As I said, this isn't an album I go back to all of the time because I do think of the filler first sometimes. I was before. So I was just like, what? The White Album? No, that's overrated. Like, what? But no, it's a great album. There's just no denying the songs. As an album, I do think that it has some issues with pacing. I think it's a bit scattershot at times. And I do wish there was a bit more of a collective vision like we hear on the best of Beatles records. But I can't deny the quality of the songs here. And it's the Beatles we're talking about. They did make great albums. They're not an overrated band. And I have a greater appreciation for this album now. I mean, because
Yeah.
I can't deny the songs on it. And I know before a while ago, on this podcast at the beginning of the year, we did an episode about Fleetwood Mac's Tusk, which has been compared to this album quite a bit, just for some of its reasons. And I even said, like, that's my White Album because I love it
Heard
so
that.
much. And those songs still really speak to me. That's still my favorite band, but I just want to go back a bit on that and say I'm not taking away from the White Album when I say that, even if it speaks to me a bit more and I think it flows a bit better. This is still a great album with compositions from once in a generation songwriters, and they're timeless songs at the end of the day. So I'm not going to take anything away from this album in that regard ever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, man. Now the toughest part, overgrade, is picking your favorite song off this whole album.
Yeah. So in the first half, I said mine was back in the USSR because I wanted to have a choice. In the second half, my gut's telling me Helter Skelter.
I like it. In the second half, I go Cry Baby Cry.
Is
But I
that
love that song.
is it
It's
overall
tough.
though?
Overall is the toughest of them all.
Yeah.
It's so crazy because overall for me ends up being a song that I didn't pick first or second because I wanted to have one on the first and one on the second.
Yeah.
For me, my favorite song of the White Album, with everything wrapped together, nostalgia, everything, for me, Rocky Raccoon is my jam of jams off the White Album.
It's that song. I still I think my own nostalgia is playing a part in my favorite still being back in the USSR. That's just
Heard
the
that?
one I always went back to over the years,
Yeah,
always. But there's just there it's this is one of those albums where different songs can be your favorite on a different day. It's one of those
truth,
albums where we've had to pick multiple I
truth.
think the last one we had multiple favorites for was Usher's Confessions, because it's just one of those. This is overall a better album than that. I don't want anybody coming for me, but it's just
Yeah,
one
no,
of those albums.
yeah, of course. Like me picking Rocky is just letting everybody, you included, know like that's my jam. But it's going up against Blackbird, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Helter Skelter, everything. I mean, this is a warm gun. I mean, there's a million tracks beautifully done on this album that are my favorites on certain days. Rocky always gets up there though.
Yeah. And also, I think any Beatles fans, your favorite song's gonna just be influenced by who your favorite Beatle is in every case, almost.
Oh, that's a
It,
good that's a good case study there. I'd like
that's
to
my
see
experience
that.
because I'm a Paul man, and my favorites almost always end up being McCartney tracks.
Yeah,
Not that I
I
don't
am.
love the others, but my favorites always end up being McCartney tracks. So
I like to consider Paul and John as a yin yang, so it's tough for me
they've
to
worked by
pull them
this point
apart.
in time, though.
I
That's the
know, I know.
problem.
I
But
I
well,
always
they
talk
always
about it.
will be.
Yeah. Oh, such a good time doing the Beatles. Thank you.
Oh,
This is a jammer.
yes, yes. Hopefully, if you want more Beatles or Beatles adjacent stuff from us, please let us know. Would love to hear that because there's a lot to dive into in regards to solo work or traveling Wilburys. Any, if you want it, let us know. We are going to be switching the gears a bit to the band that worldwide came the closest to the Beatles in terms of popularity, not just in the US, but worldwide in the 1970s after the Beatles had broken up, and that band is ABBA. We are going to have a guest on for that, which is very exciting. We haven't had a guest in a few months. It is an individual named Daniel Brilliant. He's a listener of our show, and he hosts a podcast of his own called The Gavorites, which is available to stream on Spotify if you're interested in checking that out. He's done a few other guest appearances. I am looking forward to having a new voice on this show. I think it's always good to get another perspective in, and I'm looking forward to talking about ABBA, and the album that we will be doing is 1976's Arrival, which features ABBA's number one hit, Dancing Queen. So it'll be a fun ride for sure.
Yeah, man, getting some ABBA on it and a new voice. That is one not to miss.
Yes, most definitely. So stay tuned for that. And we've got some really fun stuff coming up for you in August as well, which I know you're really looking forward to, August.
August is going to be that month for me.
Yes, it will. But I'm looking forward to it too. So yes, stay tuned. And we're really looking forward to welcoming a new voice onto our podcast next week. So until then, just rock on, be your dancing queen self, just do what you gotta do. And also, if it's as hot as it is where we are, stay cool, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.